The lights dimmed as Charlie Puth settled behind the piano on the Tonight Show stage. Jimmy Fallon beamed from his desk, that infectious energy radiating through Studio 6B, as the Roots provided a gentle backing rhythm. It was supposed to be a simple performance, Charlie's new single, 3.5 minutes, then back to comedy sketches and celebrity games. But sometimes the most powerful moments happen when the music stops. Ladies and gentlemen, performing his hit song Voices in My Head, Charlie Puth, Jimmy announced, his voice carrying across the packed studio. The audience erupted in applause as Charlie's fingers found their familiar position on the keys. The opening notes filled the air, that distinctive, haunting melody that had topped charts worldwide. Charlie began to sing, his voice pure and effortless, each note perfectly pitched. The studio audience swayed gently, phones recording, faces lit by the warm stage lights. Jimmy watched from his desk, tapping his foot to the rhythm, completely absorbed in the performance. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the audience, came a voice that cut through everything. "I wish I could sing like that, but I can't make any sound." The words weren't shouted. They were spoken with the desperate honesty that only children possess when they're trying to be heard above adult noise. Charlie's fingers faltered on the keys, not a dramatic stop, just a hesitation that anyone watching might have missed. But Charlie heard it, Jimmy heard it. And suddenly, the perfectly choreographed late-night television moment became something else entirely. Charlie looked up from the piano, scanning the audience. His voice continued automatically, years of training keeping the song moving. But his attention was elsewhere. In the third row, he spotted him, a boy, maybe 10 years old, sitting between what appeared to be his parents. The boy's hand was pressed against his throat, and even from the stage, Charlie could see tears glistening on his cheeks. That's when Charlie Puth did something unprecedented in Tonight Show history. He stopped singing, mid-verse, mid-note, mid-breath. His hands lifted from the keys. The backing track from The Roots continued for a few beats before Questlove, sensing something had changed, gradually brought the music to a halt. The studio fell into confused silence. Jimmy's head turned sharply toward Charlie, his host instincts kicking in. Technical difficulties happened. Artists forgot lyrics, but this felt different. This felt intentional. "Charlie?" Jimmy said softly, his voice barely audible through the studio speakers. "Everything okay, buddy?" Charlie stood from the piano bench, his eyes never leaving the boy in the third row. The studio lights suddenly felt too bright, the silence too heavy. 300 people held their breath, sensing they were witnessing something unscripted, something real. "What's your name, buddy?" Charlie called out to the boy, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through his wireless microphone. The boy looked around, suddenly aware that every eye in the studio was on him. His parents tried to get him to sit down, but Charlie was already walking to the edge of the stage. "It's okay," Charlie said, addressing both the boy and his parents. "What's your name?" "Tyler," the boy whispered, barely audible. "Tyler," Charlie repeated. And somehow the name sounded important when he said it. "Tyler, did you say you wanted to sing?" The boy nodded, fresh tears spilling down his face. His hand moved to his throat again, a gesture so heartbreaking in its simplicity that several audience members audibly gasped. That's when Jimmy Fallon made a decision that would define this moment forever. He stood up from behind his desk, walked around it, and joined Charlie at the edge of the stage. No script, no cue cards, no producer in his ear telling him what to do. Just two entertainers recognizing that sometimes entertainment needed to step aside for something more important. "Tyler," Jimmy said, his voice warm and encouraging. "Can you tell us what happened? Why can't you sing?" Tyler looked at his parents, who nodded encouragingly. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in that silent studio, every word carried. "I had cancer," he said simply. "The doctors had to do surgery on my throat. They said my vocal cords are damaged. They said I might never sing again, but singing was my favorite thing in the whole world. The studio was absolutely silent. Not the polite, waiting for the punchline silence of late-night television, but the profound quiet that occurs when an entire room of people simultaneously realizes they're witnessing something sacred. Charlie's eyes filled with tears. Not the controlled emotion of a performer, but the raw response of someone who understood. Because Charlie Puth had built his entire identity around his voice, around music, around the ability to create sound and melody. The thought of losing that gift was his deepest fear. Without hesitation, Charlie jumped down from the stage. It wasn't a graceful dismount. He stumbled slightly, his dress shoes not designed for impromptu stage exits. But none of that mattered. What mattered was getting to Tyler, getting close enough to look him in the eyes and say what needed to be said. The cameras followed Charlie as he made his way through the audience. People moved aside, creating a path, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing something extraordinary. When Charlie reached Tyler's row, he knelt down in the aisle, putting himself at eye level with the boy. "Tyler," Charlie said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I tell you something?" Tyler nodded. "Music isn't just about the sounds that come out of your mouth," Charlie said. "Music is about what's in here." He placed his hand gently over Tyler's heart. "And I can already tell you've got more music in there than most people I know." Jimmy, watching from the stage, felt his own throat tighten. This wasn't performance anymore. This was one human being connecting with another in the most fundamental way possible. "But I can't sing," Tyler whispered. "I can't make the sounds I want to make." Charlie smiled through his tears. "Tyler, some of the most beautiful music in the world doesn't have any words at all. And some of the most powerful voices never make a sound." Charlie stood up and extended his hand to Tyler. "Will you come up on stage with me? I want to show you something." Tyler looked at his parents, who were openly crying now. His father nodded, and Tyler took Charlie's hand. The walk back to the stage felt like a mile. The audience watched in complete silence as Charlie led Tyler up the steps and over to the piano. Jimmy joined them there, completing a circle around the instrument that had started this unexpected journey. "Tyler," Charlie said, sitting down on the piano bench and patting the space beside him. "I want you to put your hands on the piano with me." Tyler hesitated for just a moment before climbing up onto the bench beside Charlie. His small hands looked tiny next to Charlie's on the keys. "Now," Charlie said, "I want you to close your eyes and feel the music instead of hearing it." Charlie began to play, but not the song he'd been performing earlier. This was something gentler, something that seemed to come from a place deeper than performance. As his fingers moved across the keys, the vibrations traveled through the piano, through the bench, through Tyler's small body. Tyler's eyes widened. For the first time since he'd spoken, he smiled. "Do you feel that?" Charlie asked softly. Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "That's your voice, Tyler. That's your music. It doesn't come from your throat. It comes from your soul, and nobody can take that away from you." Jimmy, standing beside them, couldn't contain himself anymore. "Tyler, what do you feel when Charlie plays?" Tyler thought for a moment, his hands still on the keys with Charlie's. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been all evening. "I feel like I'm flying," he said, "like the music is carrying me." That's when Charlie did something that no one in the studio expected. He moved Tyler's hands to the higher keys and began teaching him a simple melody, not with words, but with gentle guidance, showing Tyler how to let his fingers dance across the piano. The melody that emerged wasn't perfect. Tyler's timing was off. Some notes were missed entirely, but it was beautiful in a way that perfection could never be. It was pure expression, uncorrupted by technique or training, or the pressure to sound like anyone else. The audience began to cry, not polite, dabbing at eyes crying, but the kind of deep, cathartic weeping that happens when you witness something that reminds you what it means to be human. Jimmy picked up his microphone. "Tyler," he said, "I think you just proved something to everyone here tonight. You proved that music isn't about having a perfect voice. It's about having something to say. Charlie stood up from the piano bench, but Tyler kept playing. The simple melody had evolved into something more complex. As Tyler's confidence grew, his face was radiant with joy, his earlier sadness completely transformed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jimmy announced to the camera, "this is Tyler. He's a musician, and tonight he reminded us all what music is really about." The applause that followed wasn't the typical late-night show applause. It was a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, filled with genuine emotion and appreciation for what they'd just witnessed. But Charlie wasn't finished. "Tyler," he said, pulling out his phone, "I want to give you my number. Not my manager's number. Not my publicist's number. Mine. Because I think you and I should write some songs together. Songs that don't need words. Songs that speak directly to people's hearts." Tyler's parents, who had been watching from their seats with tears streaming down their faces, couldn't believe what they were hearing. "Really?" Tyler asked, his voice full of wonder. "Really," Charlie confirmed. "Some of the most beautiful music I know doesn't have any vocals at all. And I think you've got a gift for that kind of music. A gift that's all yours." As the show wrapped up that night, as the cameras stopped rolling and the audience filed out, Tyler remained at the piano. Charlie sat with him, the two of them creating melodies that filled the empty studio with something magical. Jimmy, watching from his desk as crew members cleaned up around them, realized he'd just witnessed something that would stay with him forever. Not just a moment of good television, but a moment of genuine human connection that transcended entertainment. The episode aired exactly as it happened. No editing to make it more dramatic. No music added to heighten the emotion. It didn't need any enhancement. The raw truth of the moment was powerful enough on its own. In the weeks that followed, Tyler and Charlie did collaborate. They created an instrumental piece together that Charlie released as a single, with all proceeds going to children's hospitals. The song, titled Tyler's Voice, became a hit not because of its commercial appeal, but because it represented something pure in a world that often felt manufactured. Tyler never regained his ability to sing in the traditional sense, but he discovered something better, the ability to create music that spoke directly to people's souls. Music that proved voice comes in many forms. And Charlie Puth learned something that night that changed his entire approach to music. Sometimes the most beautiful sounds come not from perfect voices, but from perfect hearts. The piano in Studio 6B was never quite the same after that night. Stage hands would sometimes hear soft melodies coming from it during breaks between tapings, as if Tyler's spirit had somehow become part of the instrument itself, reminding everyone who heard it that music is magic, and magic belongs to everyone. 6 months later, Tyler returned to The Tonight Show, not as an audience member this time, but as a performer. He and Charlie had spent months working together, creating an instrumental album that told stories without words. Tyler's fingers had grown stronger, his melodies more complex, his confidence unshakable. That second appearance was different. Tyler walked onto the stage with the assurance of someone who had found their voice, even if it didn't sound the way he'd originally imagined. He sat at the same piano where his journey had begun, and he played a piece he'd written called Finding Flight. The melody he'd discovered that first night, evolved and refined, but still carrying the pure joy of that initial moment. Jimmy watched from his desk, remembering the scared boy who had cried out from the audience. Now he saw an artist, someone who had transformed pain into beauty, limitation into innovation. When Tyler finished playing, the studio erupted in applause, but this time it was different. This was applause for someone who had not only found his voice, but had used it to inspire countless others. Charlie joined Tyler on stage for the final song of the segment. Together they performed Tyler's Voice, the piece that had touched millions around the world. As the last notes faded, Charlie put his arm around Tyler's shoulders. "You know what the most beautiful thing about music is?" Charlie asked Tyler. his voice carrying clearly through the studio. "What?" Tyler replied, beaming with pride. "It's not about the voice you lose," Charlie said, looking directly into the camera. "It's about the voice you find." The episode ended there, but the story continued. Tyler's journey inspired a foundation that provided music therapy to children recovering from illnesses. Charlie became its ambassador, and Jimmy donated the studio space for weekly sessions where kids could discover that music comes in many forms. When people asked Tyler about that night, he would always smile and say it was when he learned that losing your voice helps you find your song. That song was truly beautiful indeed.